This is Metro Week. Our top story, the county wants voters to approve hundreds of millions of dollars in borrowing. We'll explain the 7 bond questions on the November ballot. And we'll ask a supporter and an opponent what's at stake. Then our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the bond issue and the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. Pima County is asking voters to let it borrow money for projects officials say will benefit the community. Here's what you need to know.
The biggest borrowing request in Pima County history goes before voters this fall. The more than $900 million in borrowing, in the form of county-issued bonds, would fund projects for municipalities, nonprofits, and the county itself for the next 2 decades. The bonds would be paid back with interest from increased property tax rates, which is why voter okay is needed. If all projects are approved in 7 categories, principal and interest will bring total payback to more than $1 billion. It will cost the average homeowner in the county about $56 a year for 12 years. There are 99 projects on the list, ranging from road repairs and land acquisition to new parks facilities and historical renovations. Voters will get to say yes or no 7 times, once on each of the categories. The full list you're seeing is available broken down by category on our website. The biggest group of projects is for road improvements at $200 million. Most of the money would go for repairs and pavement preservation, and there are 2 new roadway proposals that proponents say support economic development. One is the Sonoran Corridor Highway, which would be a truck bypass south of Tucson, connecting northbound Interstate 19 with eastbound Interstate 10. Another big package of projects is for parks and recreation. 4 dozen proposals in this category have a total price tag of $190 million. Included is a major expansion of sports facilities at the county-owned Keno Complex on Tucson's south side. That facility was built originally for Major League Spring Training baseball. A rundown of the complete borrowing proposal and all 99 projects in 7 categories is on the Election Center of our website at news.azpm.org.
Now we'll review the arguments for and against the bond questions. I asked Larry Hecker, who supports the bond measures, and Joe Bogart, who opposes them, to give us details on the process and the politics of this election. Mr. Bogart, we've agreed you'll go first. You were both on the Bond Advisory Committee, which sent this question to the Board of Supervisors, and the supervisors put it on the ballot. Tell me how it was serving on that committee that whittled down this long list of projects.
Well, I've been on it since 2013. And appointed by Supervisor Miller, District 1. I found it an interesting process, even though I opposed the bonds by themselves, or in entirety actually. But we've had a number of meetings. We've had at least 1 a month, and sometimes several a month since that period of time. And it was quite an effort to get it whittled down. As Larry will probably tell you, I mean, they started with considerably more than when I walked in and when it was restarted after the Great Recession.
Mr. Hecker, he just made a reference to you've been on the committee longer. How was that process?
I was originally appointed to the committee in 2003. I've been chair since then. And the last major bond election in Pima County was in 2004. In 2006, the committee started meeting again to plan for the next bond package election. And we were presented with a list of $3 billion in projects by the various jurisdictions in Pima County. And these were all very important projects.
It's a billion with a B, right?
$3 billion worth of projects that the jurisdictions felt were essential in order for them to maintain our quality of life and move forward. The recession hit in 2008, and because bonds are paid for with property tax, property values went down, and it didn't make sense to move forward. So we took a short break, and then about 2 years ago, we started meeting again. Probably had over 20 meetings. We heard from thousands of people. Generally speaking, our meetings would be attended by anywhere from 60 to 300 people. And these were people who really care about this community, who care about the projects that they presented. So it was really a rewarding experience for me because I got to hear about parts of this community that I'd never known before. And people are passionate about their needs and what we need to do as a community.
You mentioned the economy. Can you explain why you think now is the right time for voters to vote for the bonds?
Well, I think it's essential. Even though theoretically we're moving out of the recession, we're not. We're still struggling in Pima County. We need to do something to move our economy forward. And that's exactly what I think these bonds will do. Number one, there'll be an immediate stimulus with the 7,000 construction jobs that will be created. But moreover, it will allow us to remain competitive when we're trying to attract companies from out of state. We're trying to keep companies here, and more importantly, the skilled workforce that's so critical. Skilled workers can choose where to live now, and they're going to look at the amenities of a community. What's the quality of life? What's the lifestyle like? And we need to do this if we're going to stay competitive from an economic development standpoint.
Mr. Bogart, I'd like to ask you for specifics for your opposition to the bonds.
Specifics? Well, the problem that I see, and I don't see it as a growth package. First of all these jobs that are going to be created are going to come from our taxpayer dollars. So how is that growing the pot? So that's one of my big problems. And the fact that we're not really concentrating on infrastructure, I think that businesses, when they come here, they look at the downtown area, they see what a fabulous new building that the county has built down there, and then they drive on our roads and they would say, I think they have their priorities backwards when your county facilities, when your county administration buildings are the best buildings around. So I think that it has to be like Marana's doing, where they're bringing in the Simon Properties are building the mall up there. That's new money coming into our community. Those are the things that we need to bring into this area.
So it's an example of private investment that you're referencing.
That's correct. That's new money. That's new money.
But people are going to have money in order to shop in that new mall. And what this will do is hopefully create more prosperity for all of the residents in Pima County. So they'll be able to use those new facilities, which, by the way, their tax bill will be sent outside of Pima County. So they'll be paying for the improvements that their employees and their patrons will be enjoying over the course of the next 15 years.
Well, talking about the money staying in the community and the construction jobs, I was going down not La Cañada, but I was going across McGee the other day, and on the side of all of the trucks was Phoenix.
The construction company?
Construction company. That's not building jobs in our community, and we all know that those construction jobs only last as long as there are the taxpayers are willing to fund things to build.
I want to follow up on your point about private company investment. And Larry, there are several private projects on the list, and of course you looked at many projects to put together the list. One of them, San Javier Mission Repair, the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. Should taxpayers be funding these projects that are private company, private projects, private ownership? Well,
Andrew, these are nonprofits, okay? These are nonprofits that benefit the entire community. They help support our tourism industry. That's a $2.6 billion industry that employs 20,000 people in this community. And what we're trying to do is to provide that industry with some additional support. There was an article recently that talked about the Desert Museum. The Desert Museum is one of the 9th top tourist attractions in the country, according to TripAdvisor. It slipped 6 places in the last year. So making this investment in the Desert Museum is going to make us more competitive when it comes to attracting tourism. Tourism is also important to economic development. I think if you ask the professionals, they'll confirm that.
I have to disagree with that. I have never known a not-for-profit corporation being the generator of growth in a community. It's usually the beneficiary of prosperity. We don't have prosperity, and we're actually the 5th poorest community in the United States, metro area in the United States. This is the wrong way. Just because you add another exhibit at the Desert Museum or the zoo is not going to change the travel plans of thousands and thousands of people out there.
Well, Joe, I disagree, because I think that article about the Desert Museum suggests that we have a name, we have a reputation in Tucson, and people do look at what we have here in deciding where to go. I think it's very important. And yeah, we are facing some tough economic times, and we can either stand still and do nothing, or we can move forward. We can't just wait for somebody else to do it for us. We've got to do it on our own.
Well, the problem that I see with that is the fact that I think the government is standing between free enterprise, the market system, and prosperity of other companies coming in. I think it's a policy change. This isn't the first bond that we've had like this coming forward. We have the same administration, we have everything is basically the same. We're expecting different results. And I don't think that I don't think that's, we've got to start trying to attract private investment money into the community.
But Joe, private industry isn't going to build parks. They're not going to build libraries. They're not going to build museums. They need these in order to attract and retain their workforce.
Well, going back, now that we're talking about something that I think the money should be directed, and that's infrastructure. You know, if we get, first of all, our roads fixed up and looking good, our parks, they're in terrible shape.
The roads are on the list of bond projects.
True, but we know how we're going to finance them. We're going to pay about $34 million in interest to repair something that needs continual repair, or maintenance at least. Mr. Huckleberry said that the new roads they're going to build are going to cost about on a 5-year, 10-year schedule, averaging would be about $31,000 a mile. So I would assume roads that are repaired would be at least equal to that. So we're
31 million?
31,000 a mile.
$1,000 a mile. Okay.
Okay. So I would assume that we will be maintaining these roads and not having paid off the bonds yet. And as far as the bonds go, where are we getting that money from, the $816 million? We're getting it from people all over the United States, all over Arizona. When the taxpayers pay that back, where is that money going to go? It's going to be sucked. $1.1 million is going to be sucked out of our economy to go back and repay that debt. So that's not a growth plan in my opinion.
Let me talk about roads and infrastructure, because you're right. I wish there was a better source of revenue to pay for transportation. But the headline in yesterday's Arizona Daily Star said that the system's broke. The state isn't going to help us. The federal government isn't going to help us. There's just simply not enough money available to do what needs to be done for our road system. And so we have to do it ourselves. And I think that's what the Board of Supervisors realized. Gas tax isn't doing it. We don't have a sales tax, but it has to be done.
Well, we do have a sales tax. We have the same sales tax, 0.5%, that Phoenix or the metropolitan area of Maricopa has for their transportation. We have the same here at 0.5%.
At the RTA, but not at the county. Not at the county level, not at the local jurisdictions.
It's countywide, though. It's just they don't have control over the money.
I'm going to jump in and switch the topic to another one of the questions, which is open space. Mr. Hecker, one of the arguments against the bonds, or the open space question at least, is that if the county buys some property and to set it aside for open space, isn't that a double whammy on the tax rolls? Taxpayers are spending property taxes to buy the property, and then also that property comes off of the tax rolls, so it's not contributing to the tax rolls. Respond to that.
Well, I think the properties in question are mainly agricultural and ranching, and they pay very, very little property tax. They're being taken off the tax roll. The cost to maintain those to the county will be about $7 an acre. But these are all publicly accessible lands. And these are lands that there'll be trails built, hiking paths, bike paths, the things that, again, people who are looking at Tucson say, yeah, this is an outdoor community, and this is a tremendous new opportunity for us to enjoy the natural beauty that exists in Pima County.
Mr. Bogart, you've brought up the issue of debt, and I want to ask you to respond to that. Lots of private companies, private citizens go into debt to buy houses or to finance companies. What's wrong with Pima County acquiring debt?
For the proper things, I think there isn't a problem with it. But I don't think that what we're doing right here justifies the debt. It isn't so much, though we do have $1.4 billion in debt now, you add the interest. Now, this is the thing, nobody talks about interest. They're saying, oh, well, we have 1.4 billion. Well, you've also got about 300 million to 400 million in interest on that debt. So really, you're talking about 1.7, 1.8 billion dollars in existing debt, obligations, I should say, obligations. And this 816 is going to turn into 1.1 billion just for those two things. And we're not even talking about maintenance on the projects. If you build it, you got to maintain it. We're not maintaining what we've got right now.
The problem I have, Andrea, I have a tough time looking the young soccer players and the young baseball players who came to our meeting saying we need more fields, we need more facilities. I have a tough time saying, I'm sorry, I can't afford an additional $18 a year to build a playing field for so that you have some place to recreate on weekends and play your sport. The outpouring of community support for these projects was incredible, and that really touched me as I went through the process of helping craft this bond package along with the other 24 members of the bond committee.
What about the fact that other taxes in Pima County are going up at the same time?
That's the reality. I mean, we can't depend upon the state to do it. The state is requiring the county to pay for services that by law they should be paying for. So taxes are going up, but I think the amount of increase here, $18 a year, is a pretty small price to pay for the benefits that we'll be enjoying for the next 20, 25 years.
And just a last response.
The parks that we're talking about, if you look at the core, Midtown we would call it in that area from Broadway north, I think Mr. Davis addresses this, that we're spending 18 times as much out in the Keno area than we are on actually building parks that are, I think there's only a couple $1 million for parks and improvements in the core of our area, and they're the ones that are deficient in the parks.
I'm going to have to stop you both there because we are out of time, but I very much appreciate you both coming in so side-by-side voters can see your two perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Tonight on Arizona Week, a plan to put more money into the classroom and into rural education.
I'm a living example and a testimony of, that you can still grow by working in a rural school district.
Now our journalist roundtable. Joining me in the studio to discuss the bond election are Dan Shearer of the Green Valley News and Sahuarita Sun and Patrick McNamara of the Arizona Daily Star. Thanks to you both for coming in. Dan, I'd like to start with kind of the fundamental question, I think. Some voters are not going to worry about any of the projects on the list, and they're just going to say, do I want to raise my own taxes? Is that the bottom line for people?
I think that is the bottom line, and we had a forum this week in Green Valley, and if you were to ask me the 2 or 3 things that came out of it, that was probably the top one. People are saying, can I afford this? And let's face it, in Green Valley, a lot of these projects, people think you're going to pass the bond and then they're going to be built next year. That simply is not the case. They're going to roll out over the next 10 or 12 years. So a lot of people in Green Valley may not even see the results of some of this stuff. And I think that plays on their mind too. So yes, can I afford it? I think that's probably the #1 question.
And we heard Larry Hecker say $18 a year. That was for the parks portion of the questions. Right. It's about $55 a year for the average Pima County homeowner. And but as we said in the interview, there's also other property tax increases that Pima County has. Some other taxes are going up throughout the area. So it's not just a matter of $55 a year.
That's right. And in our area, we have an override for the Continental School District, which is in Green Valley. We have a $40 million bond for the Sahuarita School District. We have other fees that are going up, groceries going up, whatever. So people are taking all of this and saying, yeah, $54. Don't shame me into voting this over $54 because it isn't $54. It's a lot more.
And Patrick, you cover the Pima County as a whole. And when the Bond Advisory Committee first made its recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, it was a $600 million group of projects. And Pima County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry added the $200 million road question. Do you think that's really going to pull in some voters who are sick of driving on these streets, or how much is that going to matter to people?
I think it'll matter. The conditions of roads in the region in general have really dominated a lot of the public conversation for several years now. And at least one elected official that I know on the Board of Supervisors said, it was Ray Carroll, said he would not support a bond package unless it had roads on it. So, I think a lot of the elected officials, they get it, and they understand that people want to see something done on the roads. So that's why, we had that $200 million increase.
That's why it was added.
But out of our forum came two things on the roads. Number one, $200 million really isn't going to solve much. It's going to be a good start. So already people are looking at that. Number two, this is not the best way to pay for these improvements. And I think some people are actually stepping back and saying, you know what, I don't know that the roads are a slam dunk on this. Maybe what you do is you tell the county no and make them go back and find a better way to fund these. And I think some people are thinking in that direction. Do I think that this one will pass? Yes, I think it'll probably be the one that passes with the highest numbers. But I think some people are pausing and saying, wait a minute, we've been told to swallow this just because there's such a great need out there, but is this the best way to do this?
Now, in our interview, we talked a lot about how economic development is or is not a part of this. When we're in your forum that you held, were those voters looking at it as an economic development package or anti-economic development package, as Joe Bogart said?
Well, our chamber tends to be very conservative, but that was one of the questions that they did support is the economic development. They thought that it was very important and it's going to serve the entire region. And that's what we've been encouraging people is to vote for Pima County, not just what's going to be good for Green Valley or Sahuarita. So I do think that people see some value in this, but before they let $1 go, they want to make sure that it's explained to them properly how it's going to be spent and truly that there is some value there. But yeah, we know, and I think it was pointed out in the interview that private entities don't build parks and things like this, that we need to kind of give and take a little bit everywhere. That's why people want to be careful with this. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
For the roads portion as well, and it is a lot of money, there's the Sonoran Corridor aspect of it, and the county just recently got all of the Arizona delegation for the U.S. House and Senate to sign on to that, and they've got it listed on federal planning documents now, and they're really pushing that as an economic development proposal, that it would connect the two freeways, I-19 and I-10, and create this, what they're hoping would be a sort of aerospace and defense industry corridor, because really down there right now there's a few wildcat developments and some state prisons, and that's about it. So they're thinking that that's an area that they could develop for, really primary jobs is how they're describing it.
And that could be the single most important project of the 99. If I had to point to one, that might be it. It's just getting that thing through, because it's going to mean so much on so many different levels.
So you mean single most important for regional development?
Correct, and for just the county. And it's going to say a lot to people who don't live here. It's going to say about what we think is important.
How important, there are some projects that are in Green Valley and the Sahuarita area, your coverage area. How important are those specific projects in getting the votes of the people who read your newspapers?
Well, look at a couple of them. One is a $14 million pool and rec complex in Sahuarita. And who wouldn't be excited about a pool complex, okay? But that $14 million pool comes only if you okay $191 million in projects. And I think people are now realizing that. No, we just want the pool. I don't want the other, $200 million. And so that's a very expensive pool, especially in light of the fact that, as I mentioned, our district is asking for $40 million in a bond also. So these projects were important to get people on board and to help understand that we're not being overlooked. But I think people are saying, well, wait a minute. You just can't vote on the individual project.
Right, you vote on each of the 7 questions,
that's
so
right.
all the parks.
So that's a $191 million pool in my mind.
Now, I want to ask you both a little bit to kind of maybe take some guesses about what voters are going to do with this. As we've said, there are 7 questions on the 7 different kind of spending areas. Are people going to look at this as all or nothing, 7 yeses or 7 nos, or do you think they'll cherry pick and say, maybe as Patrick pointed out, yes to roads, maybe not to open space, for example?
Well, these forums that we've been attending and that we held are the most engaged, connected voters. And I think most of them will go through each of the 7 questions and go thumbs up or thumbs down. But historically, that's not what we've seen. We've seen everything pass. And I think that's what's going to happen this time. I think it'll all pass. I think it'll be low numbers, but it'll be enough to get it on through. If, from what I'm hearing now, if you look at just the Green Valley votes, I don't think they'll all pass there. So we'll see. But I don't think that's going to be enough to upend the entire thing. So I would say it's probably all going to go on through.
And Patrick, any perspective on this?
Well, I wouldn't I wouldn't make a prediction,
Right.
but I would say that, I think in putting this whole package together, the Bond Advisory Committee in the county really spread the wealth, if you will, throughout as many sort of interested groups as they possibly can. So there's a lot of constituents that will look at something they like probably in each one of the questions. And like Dan said, it could very well that all 7 of them pass because of that.
So people might be looking at individual projects, but then go ahead and vote on the whole questions.
Well, like we said earlier, there's always people concerned with taxes, but certainly people will look and see, well, what's in my area or my interest, and that I think will push a lot of people to probably support some of these questions.
Yeah, and that's just human nature. I think that that's probably what we're going to see.
Well, let's hope that voters educate themselves to that degree. I always wish that voters take a good look before they make a decision in either direction that they go. I do want to touch a little bit on the city council races here in Tucson. Patrick, it seems like it's been a pretty quiet election cycle. We haven't seen a ton of debates. We haven't seen, there's not even very many road signs, at least in the areas of town that I drive in. All of our papers have done profiles on the candidates, but is it actually quiet, or are there things happening that we're not really talking about?
I think it probably has been pretty quiet, especially since there's the mayor's not contested, and that would be one that really gets a lot of attention, I think. And but I think the East Side race with Paul Cunningham is probably one that's pretty going to be pretty competitive. And you're right, there hasn't been a lot of signs, but I know that there's been some forums, although I guess yesterday there was one that the Hispanic Chamber did, and the Democratic candidates, the incumbents, didn't show up for that. So there was some, I think, anger among the Republican candidates. But I think you're probably right overall. It hasn't really been a real raucous kind of election this time around.
One example of that is that in Ward 1, there were 2 groups, the Tucson Association of Realtors and another group called the Southern Arizona Business Political Action Committee, that declined to make an endorsement. So they looked at the candidates in the race and they said, we're not going to pick one or the other. Now, Dan, I know that Tucson is not your area of coverage, so generally I just wanted to ask you, what does it mean when there's no endorsement in a race?
It means that you either don't want to upset anybody or you don't like them. Now, they will never tell you that, but that's exactly what it means. They're in a pickle. And so when you don't endorse, my best guess is that they just don't think either of them is really qualified. But, endorsements are so political in nature anyway, because, it's like when you have 15 candidates and you donate to every campaign because you want to make sure that they're all happy. But they're in a pickle, But, to not endorse is as bold as endorsing, because it does send a message. But as we're trying to figure out, what's the message?
What is the message? Now, Patrick, you cover transportation for the Star as well, and I'm wondering if you feel like transportation issues have played a big role in this city election so far. I mean, we just talked about it in the bonds.
Yeah. Well, there's Proposition 201, which would ban or seeks to ban the photo radar enforcement and the speed cameras throughout the city, and I think that's probably a big deal to a lot of folks. There's a sense out there, I think you can discernibly see that in the areas where it's been used, in the city at least, the number of crashes and fatalities at these intersections has gone down, and that's you can see it through their numbers. At the same time, a lot of people are uneasy with feeling that the government's watching them through cameras around the region. But so I think that that's probably going to be an issue that some of these candidates, if they haven't already addressed, probably should. And back to the bond question with roads, this is, I think, part of a larger conversation that's going on regionally and throughout the state about how we'll fund roads and transportation infrastructure going forward. The money from the state has been sort of up and down over the years, and the HERF money, the gas tax money, has been changed with the distribution formulas, and many jurisdictions feel like they've not been getting their due, and they're looking to maybe find local revenue sources and not rely almost exclusively on the state as they've done. So this is really part of that bigger conversation of how do we fund transportation in the future.
And I want to end with just a quick perspective from you, Dan. We've got about 30 seconds left. How much does a city council election in Tucson matter to the region in your coverage area in Green Valley?
And the bigger question is, how much does Tucson really matter to Sahuarita? And Sahuarita certainly has not arrived, but we're on our way, and Tucson means less and less to us. So I don't think that there's a lot of attention to the city council races up there. I think we recognize that there's some issues in the city and that they should be dealt with and that they should be dealing with them.
All right. Thank you both for coming in. We couldn't include every bond project in this 30 minutes, so if you want more on the 7 bond questions on the ballot and the 99 projects the bond would fund, go to the elections section of our website. Thanks for watching.